We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Some secrets are like heavy stones we carry in our hearts, getting heavier with each passing day until they finally break us. My name is Emma, and I'm about to share a story that changed my family forever, a story about crossed boundaries and irreversible mistakes. I grew up in the small coastal town of Como, California, where the sound of waves and seagulls created the backdrop to my childhood. Our house sat on a quiet street just a few blocks from the ocean. It was a modest two-story home with blue shutters and a small garden. My mother tended to every weekend. My father, Alexander, owned the most popular seafood restaurant in town. Even at 49, he looked much younger thanks to his dedication to staying fit. His broad shoulders and strong arms were evidence of his daily gym routine, but more than his physical strength, it was his gentle nature that made him special to me. My mother, Sophia, taught literature at the local high school. She was the kind of person who could get lost in a book for hours sitting by our bay window with a cup of tea. Her students loved her because she made stories come alive at home. She was always ready with advice and warm hugs. Our family life was what most people would call perfect. Every evening we had dinner together, sharing stories about our day. The smell of Mum's cooking would fill the house, and Alexander would come home with funny stories about his restaurant customers. Since I was little, I had a special bond with my father. I would run to him as soon as he came home, jumping into his arms. He would catch me every time, spinning me around while I laughed. It became our daily ritual, one that made me feel safe and loved. Even as I grew older, I kept many of my childhood habits. I still sat on Alexander's lap during family movie nights, and he would still hug me like I was. His little girl mom would smile at us, probably remembering when I was small enough to fall asleep in his arms. I never thought about how these habits might change as I grew up. They were just part of who we were as a family. But looking back now, I realized that some childhood traditions should have ended when I stopped being a child. The first time I noticed something was different was during one of our usual movie nights. I was 18 then, still sitting on Alexander's lap like I always did, but this time something felt off. There was a tension in the air I'd never felt before. Alexander's arms weren't as relaxed around me as they used to be. I could feel him shift uncomfortably, and his breathing seemed different. At first I tried to ignore these changes, telling myself I was imagining things, but the changes became more noticeable. The way Alexander looked at me started to shift. His eyes would linger a bit too long, and sometimes I'd catch him watching me. When he thought I wasn't looking, it made my stomach flutter in a way that confused me. He started buying me presents for no reason, beautiful dresses, jewelry, things a boyfriend might buy. Mom didn't seem to notice anything strange about it, probably thinking he was just being an indulgent father. I began paying more attention to how Alexander looked. I noticed things I shouldn't have, how strong his arms were, how his smile made his eyes crinkle at the corners, how other women at his restaurant would flirt with him. These thoughts made me feel guilty, but I couldn't stop them. Our hugs started lasting longer than they should when I'd s his cheek goodbye. There was an awkward moment afterward where neither of us knew what to do. The air between us became charged with something I didn't want to name. Mum's business trips for school conferences became more frequent that year. Each time she left the house felt different. The air grew thick, with unspoken words and hidden glances. Alexander and I would orbit around each other, both aware of something changing between us. One night, when Mom was away at a teacher's conference, Alexander prepared a special dinner. The dining room was lit with candles, and he had opened an expensive bottle of wine. I should have recognized it for what it was: not a father. Dorug to dinner. He poured me a glass of wine, then another and another. The room grew warm and fuzzy. We talked about memories from my childhood, but something about the way he looked at me made those innocent stories feel different. I felt pretty that night wearing one of the new dresses he had bought me. The way his eyes followed me made my heart race deep down. I knew this wasn't how a father should look at his daughter, but the wine made it easy to ignore that voice of reason. We moved to the living room after dinner, sitting closer than we should have. The wine had made me brave, or maybe just reckless. I asked him questions I never should have asked, and he gave me answers that changed everything. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs. I ignored the way our relationship had shifted gradually, like a boat drifting off course. So slowly you don't notice until you're lost at sea. But that night, I didn't want to see the signs. The first K***S happened so naturally, it was terrifying. One moment we were talking, and the next everything changed. It felt like crossing a line drawn in invisible ink. You don't see it until you've already stepped over it. After that night, we created a world of secrets. Every time Mom went away, every moment we found ourselves alone, we added another layer to our deception. The guilt was always there, but we pushed it down, buried it under stolen moments and whispered promises. Alexander started finding reasons to come to my room at night when Mom was sleeping. The creaking of the floorboards would alert me to his approach, making my heart race with equal parts, anticipation and shame. We became experts at acting normal. During the day, we'd sit at breakfast with Mom talking about ordinary things while carrying the weight of our secret. Every casual touch, every shared glance held a different meaning.
Now,
the sound of Mom's footsteps would make us jump apart. We lived in constant fear of discovery, but that fear somehow made everything more intense. It was like living in a bubble that could burst at any moment. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake at night, thinking about what we were doing. Sometimes I'd cry silently, knowing I should stop this, knowing I should tell someone. But then Alexander would hold me, and I'd forget why I was crying. My grades started slipping at school. Friends noticed I seemed distracted, but I couldn't tell them why. How do you tell anyone about something like this?
who would understand?
I felt completely alone with my secret. The lie started small but grew bigger. I made up stories about where I was going. Who I was with each lie made it easier to tell the next one. I watched myself becoming someone I didn't recognize. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and wonder who I was looking at. The girl staring back at me seemed different, older, sadder, carrying a weight that showed in her eyes. I barely recognized myself anymore. The worst part was seeing Mom's complete trust in both of us. She'd tell me how lucky she was to have such a close family, how happy it made her to see how well Alexander and I got along. Each compliment felt like a knife in my heart. Spring turned to summer, and our secret grew like a shadow, stretching longer and darker. With each passing day, the heat made everyone sluggish, but for Alexander and me it was electric. Every moment alone was dangerous. We started taking more risks, becoming careless. Looking back, I can see how our growing confidence was leading us toward disaster. We thought we were too clever to get caught, too careful to make mistakes. The guilt started eating at me from the inside. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, jumped at every sudden noise. Mom started asking if I was feeling all right, suggesting I see a doctor, if only she knew she was the reason for my sickness. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but the words would die in my throat. How do you admit to something like this? How do you explain? Betraying the person who gave you life, who loved you unconditionally. Each day became harder than the last. I'd wake up promising myself it would end, that I'd stop it all. But then night would come, and all my promises would dissolve in the darkness. Our secret life had a routine. Now we knew Mom's schedule, knew when it was safe, knew how to act. When it wasn't, the planning made it feel almost normal, and that terrified me more than anything. The night everything fell apart started like any other deceptively normal evening. Mom had called to say her teacher's conference would keep her overnight, something about bad weather delaying her return flight. I remember how my heart started racing at those words. Alexander and I exchanged glances across the kitchen table, a silent understanding passing between us. We had gotten too comfortable with our secret, too confident in our ability to hide that confidence would be our downfall. After dinner, we didn't even pretend to watch TV like we usually did. The house felt different when we knew Mom wouldn't be home, like a different world where normal rules didn't apply. We moved through the rooms like ghosts touching, K***sing, forgetting everything but each other. I remember every detail of that night with painful clarity, the sound of crickets outside my window, the distant rumble of thunder promising the storm, the way the hallway light cast long shadows on my bedroom wall. These ordinary things would forever be tied to what happened next. We were so lost in our own world that we didn't hear the front door open, didn't hear the soft footsteps on the stairs, didn't notice anything until my bedroom door swung open, flooding the room with harsh light from the hallway. Mum stood in the doorway, her silhouette frozen like a statue. Her briefcase slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a thud that seemed to echo through the entire house. That sound marked the exact moment our family shattered. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at my mother's face as everything she thought she knew about her family crumbled. Alexander jumped up first, stumbling over words trying to explain the unexplainable, but Mum's face stopped him cold. I had never seen someone look so destroyed, so completely broken. Her eyes moved between us, as if hoping she would wake up from this nightmare. Then she turned and walked away. No screaming, no crying, no accusations, just the sound of her footsteps down the stairs, the front door opening and closing, the soft purr of her car engine starting fading into the night. That quiet departure was somehow worse than any reaction I had imagined. Alexander and I didn't look at each other. We couldn't. Everything that had seemed so important, so passionate, so real, just moments before now felt hollow and sick. The spell was broken, leaving only shame and horror in its wake. I spent that night curled up in my bathroom, violently sick, my body trying to purge itself of the guilt that filled every cell. Alexander stayed downstairs. I could hear him pacing, making phone calls that went unanswered, his voice growing more desperate with each attempt. Mum didn't come home the next day or the day after. Her absence filled the house like smoke, making it hard to breathe. Alexander and I moved around each other like strangers, unable to look each other in the eye, unable to speak about what had happened. When Mum finally returned, it was with divorce papers. She packed her things methodically, as if she were cleaning out a classroom. At the end of the school year, her face was blank, her movements mechanical. She had cried all her tears somewhere else. I tried to talk to her, to explain, to apologize, but she held up her hand to stop me. "Not now," she said, her voice flat. Maybe not ever. Those words cut deeper than any angry outburst could have. The news spread through our small town like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone knew. I could feel their stares, hear their whispers. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid us. Our family's shame became public property. Alexander moved out, first taking a small apartment above his restaurant. The business suffered. People stopped coming, uncomfortable with the scandal. He started drinking more, his strong frame becoming stopped, his confidence, turning into a shuffle. I stayed in the house alone for a while, but the memories were suffocating. Every room held echoes of what we had done, what we had destroyed. The happy family photos on the walls became accusations, reminders of everything we had lost. My aunt finally came to get me, insisting I couldn't stay there alone. She lived in another state, far from the whispers and Star. I didn't argue. There was nothing left for me in Karma except ruins. The following months passed in a blur of therapy sessions and sleepless nights. I learned new terms for what had happened, clinical words that tried to explain away the inexplicable, but no amount of analysis could erase what we had done. My therapist encouraged me to write letters to Mum, even if I never sent them. I filled notebooks with apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. The words never seemed adequate, never captured the depth of my regret. I tried to contact Mom several times, but she had changed her number, moved to a new town. Her colleagues at school wouldn't tell me where. I understood she needed to rebuild her life far away from the people who had destroyed it. Alexander tried to reach out once, leaving a voicemail that I couldn't bring myself to listen to for weeks. When I finally did, his voice was unrecognizable. Broken, slurred, desperate. He wanted to explain, to understand, to make sense of what we had done, but there were no explanations that could make it right. No words that could rebuild what we had torn down. Our actions had created a chasm too wide to bridge, too deep to fill. I threw myself into college, moving across the country to escape my past. I changed my name, told people my parents were dead. In a way, they were the people they had been. The family we had been no longer existed. Years passed. I graduated, found a job, built a new life, but the weight of what happened never left me. It shaped every relationship, every decision, every moment of my new existence. Sometimes I dream about those days before everything fell apart, the happy family dinners, the movie nights, the simple joy of being loved and protected. Then I wake up and remember how we destroyed it all. I saw Mom once, years later in a grocery store 2 states away. She looked older, greater, but somehow peaceful. She was with a man smiling, laughing. I watched from behind a display of cereal boxes, tears running down my face, unable to approach her. The man she was with looked nothing like Alexander.
I was glad about that.
She had found a way to move on, to be happy again. I wouldn't destroy that by making her remember. Alexander didn't fare as well. The last I heard, he had sold the restaurant and moved somewhere up north. His drinking got worse. Sometimes I worry about him, but I can't let myself get pulled back into that orbit. I've learned to live with what we did, but I'll never forgive myself. Some choices can't be undone. Some wounds never heal completely. The best we can do is learn from them. Try to become better people. Now I work with troubled families, trying to help others avoid the path we took. I can see the warning signs clearly now, the boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, the relationship ***s that need to be protected. When people ask about my family, I tell them it's complicated. That's the simplest truth I can offer. The full story is too heavy to carry into new relationship ***s, too dark to share with casual acquaintances. Every year on my mom's birthday, I send a card to her old address. I don't know if she receives them, but I keep sending them. Each one contains the same message: I'm sorry, I love you. I hope you're happy. I've thought about having my own family someday, but the fear holds me back. How can I trust myself to maintain proper boundaries when I failed so spectacularly before? How can I risk causing that kind of pain again? Sometimes I think about writing down the whole story, warning others about how easily things can go wrong, how quickly a family can fall apart. But then I remember the pain in my mother's eyes that night, and I know some stories are better left untold. This is the first time I've shared the full truth. Maybe someone reading this will recognize the warning signs in their own life and step back from that invisible line before it's too late. That's all I can hope for now. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that family is precious and fragile. Once broken, it can never be put back together, exactly as it was. The pieces might form a new shape, but the cracks will always show. Those who still have their families whole and healthy protect that gift. Don't take it for granted. Don't let anything damage those sacred bonds, because once they're broken, all the love and regret in the world can't make them whole again. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. I am glad to see you on my channel if you like the content.